So thanks, guys, for joining the Startups Innovation Podcast. Dave and Flynn, thank you very much for joining. So we have a few questions here. Maybe let's start a little bit, about what you guys do. So can you maybe go through a little presentation of both of you, and maybe we start with Dave, so since you're up there on the screen. We'll do the circle there.
Alistair, thanks for having us. I sort of speak for Flynn to tell you it's great to be here. So I work at Echelon Front. So I'm a former Marine. I recently retired after 23 years and joined two good friends of mine who I served in Iraq with on a Ford Air Controller tour in Iraq many years ago. We stayed close, and we started a consulting company that's done great. And they contribute a lot to business and industry, people's personal lives, and make a big contribution out of their time in the Navy, and that was really appealing to me. So it brought me on board as a leadership instructor with their company.
Excellent. And that's Echelon Front, right?
Echelon Front, fantastic consulting firm.
Great. Yeah, I've seen that. And you, Flynn?
Yeah, so I work with Dave at Echelon Front. I've only been there a couple months now. Leif and Jocko are the two founders, two of the mentors, my mentors in the SEAL teams. When I was going through, I spent about 8 years, and 6 of those in the SEAL program. Leif was my executive officer at SEAL Team 1 for about two and a half years. And then Jocko put my platoon through a couple times, which was got the full benefit of Jocko's training.
Awesome.
After I got out of the Navy, I went to business school for a few years and what I wanted to do when I grew up. Ended up going to McKinsey for about 3 years to do some management consulting, and then just moved over to Front to help scale up what they've been doing. They wrote a book. Leif and Jocko wrote a book about 5 years ago. Launched about 3 years ago.
This one
called There It Is.
Yep.
Yeah, and that really kind of accelerated what Echelon Front was doing. And since then, we've had hundreds of engagements with clients or industries and really all functions.
And there's a new book coming up, right? Since we're talking about the books of Jocko, isn't it? Discipline Equals Freedom. I think I saw this. There's a new book, right?
Yeah. So Discipline Equals Freedom field manual just launched maybe a month ago. It was probably 4 weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, I think October 17th.
And awesome. It's slightly different than extreme ownership. It's a bit more coffee material. So it's a compilation of the questions that Jocko, or the answers to the questions Jocko was getting through his podcast and on Twitter. He took some of the common questions he was getting and kind of put those together to make a kind of a compelling book that has kind of small snippets. You can read it for 2 minutes at a time and take something away, or you can go cover to cover and probably need a couple hours or less than that.
And does Jocko and you guys really wake up at 4 a.m. every morning? 4:30 a.m. every morning? Or I see on Twitter he always have the picture with the 4:30 a.m. So I was wondering, there
are some rules and regulations about being part of the Echelon Front team. Waking up at 4:34 every morning is not one of those. Now we can't get up and do get up on occasion that early. I'm not a 4:30 riser. I an hour or two later, typically for me. Dave's an early riser though. He's up in the 5 o'clock hour, I think.
When the team is together, it's a 4:45 wake up.
Yep.
And Jocko is legit. He's up early every day. I will vary, but we all get up. We get up early. We work out early and start the day and session. But Jocko certainly is way out in front of us on that one.
Excellent. And so the next question, so maybe the difference between Navy SEALs and Marine Corps, and what's the training you guys go through? Because, you are known to be the elite military, teams. So what's the sort of curriculum and what would you guys learn there?
Well, maybe the best thing is rather than draw a contrast, I can just talk just briefly about my experience in the Marine Corps, and Flynn can do the same with his experience in the SEAL teams. In some ways, a lot of similarities, but you think you'll find also some significant differences. Bear in mind too, I was a Marine in a conventional force. I'm a special operator. My time in the Marine Corps was mostly centered around being a pilot. So, like any service, any military service, I went to officer school, which is essentially like a boot camp for officers. It's 84 days total time. And, it can be grueling. It's physically and mentally demanding. It's really a screening process more than anything to see what the Marine Corps considers the right qualities to be a leader in combat. And then from there, I was lucky enough to get selected for an aviation billet. So I was going to become a Marine aviator for several years, over 2 years in just the Navy and the Marine Corps flight training. The Navy and the Marine Corps do a ton of training together because we operate usually in the same environments and we'll work very closer. And, there's plenty of rivalries, but they're all very friendly rivalries. The services are very closely aligned. And so the training that I had was identical to any naval aviator, whether it was a UN or a U.S. Navy pilot. And I spent a lot of my career as a fighter pilot flying with the Navy. I spent 4 years off carriers. I flew at Top Gun as a Top Gun instructor on the Navy Fighter Weapons School. And so my experience as a Marine was mostly flying aircraft, working with the Navy. My one departure was the year I spent as a forward air controller. So I left the cockpit after Top Gun, and I basically was assigned a job where I was on the ground using my radio to call on airstrikes and air support to support, in this case, was the Army. And that's when I worked very closely with Leif and Jocko, their SEAL team task unit, which was called Task Unit Bruiser, which is Jocko's task unit. And one of the platoons in there was Leif's platoon called Charlie Platoon. And his team and my team aligned very closely, in most missions that I went on was connected with them. And I would use my radio, and I'd call on airstrikes, I'd call on air support, all the things that aviation can do to help those guys. And that was my 1 year working closely with the SEALs and working with that team and getting to know how they do business. I'm not a SEAL, not in the Navy, couldn't speak to what they went through, but I can certainly speak to their talents on the battlefield, which are certainly exceptional.
Excellent. Wow, impressive curriculum and experiences there. And you, Flynn?
Yeah.
That's awfully kind, Dave. Dave's also humble. He's a very accomplished Marine Corps pilot who's qualified. The only person in the world qualified on 4 platforms: F-35, F-18. What are the 4, Dave?
F-18, F-16, F-22, and F.
Wow. He's had an incredible career in the Marine Corps as a pilot, and was a huge benefit to Task Unit Bruiser on the battlefield during Ramadi. So just a bit about the SEAL teams. There's a couple ways of getting in. The SEAL training is unique in a sense that the officer enlisted training is almost exactly the same. That's somewhat common in the military to have that training, and so it's the initial training is called BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition. SEAL training is about 7 months long. There's an introductory phase, and then there's 3 phases afterwards: phase 1, 2, and 3. It's tough training. Especially the initial training is a bit more about the want and the will to become a SEAL, as opposed to teaching you specific skills that are going to be useful in the battlefield, outside just sucking it up when things are terrible.
Yeah.
There's a 5-week or 3-week in-doc phase, and then you get into phase 1, which is, I think, 7 or 8 weeks. Week 4, week 5, that is Hell Week. Now you get most of there's a lot of information out there about kind of the SEAL training. Most of it is actually focused on in-doc and first phase, and where you get 70 to 80, maybe even 90% of the attrition happens during those two phases, phase 1. And so, it's difficult training. You're cold, you're wet, you're tired, you're sandy. Everything is a competition. There's nothing you do that isn't timed. There's nothing you do that there isn't a winner and a loser, and it pays to be a winner is one of the sayings, where you need extra time to rest, or if you lose, you get additional punishment, which doesn't work out so well. So it's intense. You train very closely. Your fellow classmates become like brothers. It's a rite of passage. There's always this really special bond between, BUDS classes as you go through. And once you make it through BUDS, you go to SEAL qualification training. And it's about a year long. And that's really where you start to learn how to become a SEAL, where you spend a lot more time shooting, maneuvering, communicating. That's where you spend some time in, the water, where the SEALs, we do a decent, where we're kind of the elite force for anything maritime. Now, granted, the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot of land operations. So we spend the vast majority of our time there. But when it comes to anything, water related, anti-piracy type work, over the horizon type work, the SEALs would typically be the first group called in. And that differentiates just a little bit, from the Marine Corps and some of the Army Special Operations units. So we do a lot, very similar training, very similar capabilities and skill sets. We spend, So I mean, it's again about a year and a half training pipeline, and then you get then you sent out to the very kind of the team gets or the platoon, not the platoon, excuse me. The class gets shotgunned out to the various teams, and another year and a half of training with your platoon before you probably deploy.
Wow, that's an impressive training. So one year and a half, you say, and then one more year before you go on the field.
At least, maybe even longer. It could, depends on where you get to your team in the cycle, but where you're, operating member of a platoon, it's going to be 3 to 3.5 years before you actually deploy. It's going to be almost all training up until then.
Excellent. And is the training, I guess it's not just physical, right? Training, it's also, strategic thinking, problem solving, or is it really just physical and tactical, techniques, shooting and things like this? Do you also go through sort of a, strategic process, Sun Tzu, The Art of War? Is that for tourists? And are you guys really trying to understand the dynamics, of wars, of, power, politics, all this stuff, or not so much?
So, not initially. I think most of the time, probably very similar to what Flynn went through, is you kind of get through this hurdle of whether or not you've passed the screening process. You get into your specialty. We call it a occupational, whatever your career field is going to be in. He was a SEAL, I was a pilot. And most of the beginning phase of that career is teaching all the resident skills to be a really good tactical leader or tactical operator, being able to just do your job well. So I spent most of my time learning how to fly the airplane really well. But the military has, a lot of educational programs to learn, missions are like, and then eventually over time, if you stay in long enough, I did 23 years. I left with a master's. I did a lot of studies in military science, policy, strategic studies. And so you get that, but it's much later in the career. To be honest with you, I never quite achieved that threshold in my career while I was contributing to that. That's a higher level in terms of where they expect you to do that. So I was really comfortable at the tactical level and the operational level, but never really participated in the big strategic level of the military, although I was on a time frame to kind of learn to do that later in my career. But at the beginning, it's really about being really good in with your equipment, being really good with your being comfortable with implementing somebody else's strategy.
Excellent. So then maybe can we quickly cover, a little bit what Echelon Front does, what's a Mooster, what are the type of private workshops you guys run, and maybe cover also the Jocko Willink's podcast, because I think it's all linked, unless I'm wrong, but, can you give us like a high level picture of, Echelon Front and the activities around this?
Yeah, Flynn, do you want to take the Echelon Front and I'll do the podcast just because I've been on it?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so Echelon Front is again, as earlier, it's a leadership consultancy where we've taken essentially the leadership lessons from the SEAL teams and I've presented them in a way that can be applied to business and life. And so, what we do is there's a number of we provide. We do some keynote addresses, some speaking engagements. So we'll come in and sales kickoff or talk through the various extreme ownership leadership principles, in a two hour period. Another service we provide is around workshops. So we do 1, 2, 3 day workshops where we obviously go through principles to ground everyone in them and then dive deep into specific ones that make sense for the company, things they're struggling with, whether it's one of the laws of combat or one of the sets that we talk about that are critical to being successful on the battlefield and then also in business. And then the third kind of product we provide is a Extreme Ownership Muster.
Okay.
This is an opportunity for people who are interested more about, again, the Extreme Ownership leadership principles. We get them all together in various locations throughout the country. We've done 4 to date, a couple ago, 1 in Texas and 1 in New York City, where we have 400 to 500 to 600 people come in, and we spend 2 days really just getting after it, dive to, again, the principles. There's a ton of interaction with opportunity for we call them troopers. Anyone who comes becomes a echelon member. Tons of opportunity to engage with the leadership instructors. Leif and Jocko are extraordinarily accessible. We obviously start the day off with some 5 PT, both days of the conference, and then just have a.
What's
yeah.
PT? What's PT?
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so we do workouts, 445 workouts. So we do group workouts, and we usually get 2/3 to 3/4 of the attendees come out to it. And I would say there's a good mix between just individuals who are fired up about coming, and then also we get a lot of businesses or companies set 5 or 6 or 10 of their employees to come out and spend time. And it's an extraordinarily impactful 2 days. Where you get to, again, interact with not instructors, but also like-minded people who are looking to improve, looking to get better in all aspects of their life.
Yep.
And then really the kind of I would say last piece, but the other product we provide is actually we're in the process of creating some digital online training. So this is taking the content from the Extreme Ownership book, the muster, and providing web-based training that individuals and also companies can plug in to help, distill these leadership principles throughout an organization. It will scale up. It won't require it. It'll be a different price point than having echelon front leadership instructor come on site to talk through it. But it'll be a cool way to get to these principles throughout entire organization. And then, I guess the last piece is really long-range training program. So it's a combination of all the things I just discussed. We currently working with 3 or 4 long-range clients where we spent, it's anywhere from 12 to 18 to 24 months where we have, engagement every month, 2 months. We'll come on site and talk through principles and talk through implementation of Extreme Ownership and how's it going and problem solve on ways to make it better and dive deeper into principles that make the most sense.
Excellent. So let's dive into, Extreme Ownership and how it applies to business situations, sales, and entrepreneurship. You guys ready? So we see often, and maybe you guys see it too on LinkedIn, often you see, a good leader versus, a bad leader, or, manager versus boss, and this type of comparison. In your views, what makes a bad leader or good leader, but also a good employee versus a bad employee? And we could, correlate this maybe to, a good commander or leader in the military versus a good soldier, because often we hear employees, sort of say, stuff about their managers, their boss, and the boss is talking about their employees. So what's your view, good leader and good employee?
I think succinctly, I would say the qualities are the same. I think what you're looking for in leadership is really the same type of behavior you're looking for in anybody. And so, we certainly break down, we will interact with people at different levels. You have, C-suite folks, you have executives, frontline true mid-level managers, supervisors, and really everybody at every level of the organizational chart. But the qualities, I think, that people need to develop to be good at whatever stage they are in their career or whatever position they are in their company, they're pretty similar. And that's part of the reason why I think something Flynn said earlier was so valuable is the idea that we learn from in combat and we learn from our time in the military. They don't just translate to business. They don't just translate to leadership in the corporate world, everything in life. And the qualities, I think, what we understand and what we try to demonstrate is they're universal. And so the idea of building good relationship, responsibility for the decisions that you make, preparing yourself, training, working hard, finding ways to interact with your peers, your leaders that are above you, your subordinates below you. Those are universal concepts. And I think what differentiates really successful companies and successful individuals, successful parents, friends, things like that, prioritize the success of the organization, the success of their family, the success of their group over their individual success. And that's true at every single level. And I think that's part of the reason that Echelon Front is so powerful, is it's not unique to one little organization, one group of people. It's appropriate really for everybody at every phase in their life.
Excellent. And what is extreme ownership then?
Extreme ownership is pretty simple. You are responsible for every problem, every solution in your world, above you, below you, sideways, or directly in front of you. You're responsible for everything. And really the way to look at that is any impediment, any problem, any issue that gets in the way of successful or your team being successful, you're responsible for that. And I think there's just a natural human inclination to place blame elsewhere. There's a whole host of reasons why we like to go well. The market, the economy, our bosses, our employees, people we're working with. And that's essentially the opposite of extreme ownership. You are responsible for everything in your life, everything, every problem, every solution. And that compels people to find solutions to their problems and be successful. And that's what the overarching requirement is just be successful.
So excellent. So the idea is, if let's say, sometimes some people feel they work for, managers that are not, they say not so competent. Would the idea be there?
Sure.
No excuse, influence your manager, try to educate your manager, try to work with him, make everything so that the goal is achieved overall, and take the ownership also on managing up, and same stuff when it goes down, right? Managing down. Don't blame.
We call that leading up the chain. The second you find a reason why your boss is not good enough to lead your team to be successful, you found a reason to fail. So you can spend all your time lamenting all the flaws that your leadership has, or you can find ways to help lead up the chain and provide solutions for whatever problems your leadership has. And I think what I find is it's easy to draw that conclusion. But the truth of the matter is that most of the people we work for, most of our bosses, our leaders, they actually want to be successful just like we do. And they have different abilities. They might live in a different world and are focusing on other things, and sometimes don't understand the negative impacts that they might be having. And if you lead up and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with your message. I'm struggling providing you the result that you want. Can you help me? Most leaders are going to stop and go, I didn't realize that. I absolutely do want to help you. And they're really appreciative when board and can say, look, I'm struggling with being successful in the way that I think you want me to be. Can you help me do a better job? And that is usually pretty well received.
I think this is really powerful, and I'm pretty sure, a lot of company needs this, for sure. I'm a business consultant, and I see this happen again and again. And I do see this as a very powerful concept. And Jay Summit, we interviewed Jay Summit, the author of the book Disrupt You. So he said, entrepreneurs are better at making excuses than products. So this applies for the same thing, right? Oh, if only I had the funding. Oh, if only, I had the team to be able to, go sell and so on. Extreme ownership means for an entrepreneur, don't make excuses, be creative, find ways to, solve your issues, solution things, right? Is that what I'm getting?
I think you got it. Yeah.
I mean, leadership is the scarcest, precious resource in the world. And that's going to be the key differentiator between a business and one that middles in mediocrity or fails. And, a lot of people, when they think about leadership, they think every leader in the SEAL is a great leader. And that's just not the case. We had great leaders, and we had a lot of mediocre leaders, and we had some terrible leaders. As I reflect back on situations I had where with one particular leader who was my direct superior, who I didn't think was very good. I tried to, I would say manipulate, but I tried to maneuver and flank and support in ways that honestly, at the end of the day, weren't helpful because I allowed my ego to get in the way. And so as we talk a bit about what separates good leaders from great leaders, or the key element to being a great leader is humility and being able to self-assess and realize that you don't have all the answers. You could sit back and what I was a platoon commander, and I had this leader I didn't respect and think was very good. I let my ego get in the way, and honest and helpful. And I, again, it was a bit of a, poor me. We're not going to go to this place because of him. And instead of coming up with this that Dave mentioned, it might have been a problem. I exasperated the problem with my ego. But, at the end of the day, realize that, hey, I need to get it done. And as an entrepreneur thinks about the situation, whether this investor isn't helping, or this board member seems to be getting in the way, it's on you to fix that. And your product or your company is going to sink and swim based on your ability to problem this person align, or figure out how to get around it.
Yep, and I've seen this. I worked for Millipore Sigma, now Merck, great company, top performing, double the size in 5 years. And they had really that culture of extreme ownership, accountability. And I've seen with other companies, distressed companies, where, shit hits the fan, sorry for the language, but where,
my ears are bleeding.
And it even becomes, more difficult to avoid those type of blaming games when it's really, a tough situation, right? And I'm guessing on the battlefield, same thing. When the bullets are coming your way, and the leader is the mediocre leader, the pressure augments. So, but how do you manage this when shit hits the fan, and still stay and try to build the team, the relationships, still try to work with that leader? What would you do there? It's the same principles, but isn't the pressure increasing when the situation gets worse, kind of? And
so you answered your question. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same principles. And yeah, look, combat is absolutely, there's a lot of pressure there. I remember finding myself, on the ground and realizing that I was in a much more demanding environment than I was accustomed to. And I found myself, certainly when I first got there, and found myself in firefights, and found myself shooting a rifle, and things and doing things that I really spent most of my career not really thinking about that it was going to happen to me. I think very quickly I found myself feeling like it might be in over my head, and that the pressure was maybe harder or tougher than I could have handled. And really what it boils down to is that the qualities and the skills that you need to be successful in combat are the exact same ones everywhere else. And what you need to do is you need to retain your composure. You need to understand what's going on. You need to do your job. And really it starts, you got to rewind the clock a little bit. You have to prepare, and you have to plan, you have to train. And you have to anticipate the best you can. And then you have to recognize that at some point you're going to be uncomfortable. At some point you're going to be unhappy. At some point you're going to be in pain. You're going to suffer and feel a whole bunch of things that you enjoy, but you need to understand that those things are going to happen. And look, I don't know too many people that start businesses that don't go through periods of time where there's a huge amount of responsibility. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, especially, you're really dealing with your livelihood. The risk of failure could really impact your family's life tremendously. So to say that there's, the pressure is different. Yeah, combat's different. It is, certainly to a degree. And I'm glad that most of the world that if we make a mistake, then somebody's going to end up getting killed. But the reality is that, in the world that you're talking about, in any professional business, any corporate, any place, you have to make difficult decisions and lead under difficult circumstances, and livelihoods are at stake. And, there's plenty of career fields where lives are at stake as well. So, but, Flynn and I spent a lot of time trying to strip away the veneer that the military is different, and what we learn there is different, and the people are different. They're just said it well. They're great SEALs, like you said. Same thing for Marines and pilots. There's some fantastic fighter pilot leaders. There's some mediocre ones, and there's several ones that probably shouldn't be doing it. We're human beings just like everybody else. We're not robots. We don't just follow orders. We think objectively. We suffer from laws that every other organization, every other group of human beings suffers from. Combat does have some dynamic environments that are challenging, and you got to prepare for those and implement. And the one combat is the exact same way you're successful in every other environment. And that's just the bottom line.
Great. And so about decisiveness. So you talked about, making decision. How important is it to make decisions and what's the process, in combat to make a decision, a good decision? How do you know it's a good decision?
Well, it's a good decision after you go through the next step and you actually act on that decision and you see what the outcome is. So I talk a lot on front. I talk about something called the OODA loop, which is a decision-making process where you observe the world around you, you orient yourself to it, you make a decision, and you take action. Actually, the truth matter is making decisions isn't that hard. We love making decisions. I'll bring my team in and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And Flynn, I want you to do this. And Alistair, I want you to do this. What actually is really hard, taking action. Because the difference between a decision and an action is that you take ownership of it. Once you implement, once you act, that's yours. And I got news for it. I made a lot of really bad decisions in combat. I made a ton of mistakes. If you look at even the book from Jocko and Leif, the book Extreme Ownership, it's about a mistake. It's about an error. It's about a flaw. It's about something that we did wrong, the lesson that was learned, and how it applies to life. That book does a really good job explaining that we make mistake time, and the laundry list of bad decisions I made in combat is pretty long. But I think the differentiator there, certainly for me, and I think for most of us, is you learn from it, you apply the lesson, and you make a new decision again. And the process of making decisions, taking action, and doing it all over again, that process, what we call the loop, it's critical. The last thing you want to do in combat, last thing you want to do in anything challenging in life, is to do nothing. Yep. And a lot of people get paralyzed by the idea that if you implement a decision, that you're responsible for the outcome. Once you embrace the fact that you're responsible for everything, once you get comfortable with the idea that everything is on you,
yep,
actually get to making decisions and taking actions. And what you'll find is, as a leader of an organization, when you demonstrate that you're comfortable making decisions, taking action, and taking responsibility, your people will follow you literally anywhere. And they'll actually start doing the exact same thing.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, extreme ownership, fundamental to extreme ownership is you have to be willing to get fired. Right? You're going to take ownership for any mistake, right? And you have to stand up and say, it's mine. It's my fault. And not to just, here are the 27 things I'm going to do differently to ensure this doesn't happen again. And if you do that, you take ownership of it, take ownership of the problem, and then also the solution. I have a hard time thinking that someone's going to get fired. Jocko has the term extreme ownership comes from a situation that all was Jocko's fault. Like there was a kind of a terrible blue on blue situation. He writes about in the book. He does the TED Talk, but that ultimately comes from him standing up and saying, the 25 people did something wrong on this operation for this to happen. But guess what? You guys were under my command, and I should have fixed it. I should have broke the error chain. And again, he wasn't fired for it. Spoiler alert: he wasn't fired. It actually. It actually emboldened and kind of calcified his team together to continue to do great things and take more ownership and realize, hey, this guy Jocko, he's gonna, and I'm not gonna let him down, right? So it changed the attitude and mindset of the troopers, 2 or 3 levels below him, to say, you know what, I know Jocko's responsibility for my mistake. I'm not gonna allow that to happen again. Right. And in that mindset coming from the top, him being the role model of what it looks like, just I would say motivated, but really instilled this mindset that was the key to their success over there and key to success in business in general.
Excellent. And communication effectiveness. So, and command, control, collaboration. So I don't know if it's really relates both of them together, but how do you communicate something when you have under you? How many people did you lead? Under your command, how many people were there? Maybe let's start with this.
So I was a platoon commander, and so a platoon is typically about 16 to 18 SEALs in a platoon, and then when you deploy, you add on some additional support elements, and it could be upwards towards 30 to 35 that you're controlling in combat.
Okay. So how do you communicate effectively, the mission, the strategy, and what's the secret weapon, if you will, to make sure that everyone's aligned, everyone knows what needs to be done?
Extreme ownership talks about the 4 laws of combat. First being cover and move. The second is simple. The third, prioritize and execute. And fourth is decentralized command. Obviously, when we talk about the communicate a plan, this falls squarely under simple. we work with a lot of companies, and they talk about what their strategic planning process or specific initiatives they have, and they come up and they show these extraordinarily complex plans about, this operations element needs to work, with this sales group, which also needs to be tightly integrated to this R&D element, and on this timeline. And we sit back and say, can the frontline sales guy understand this plan? And you have arrows, and you have pink arrows and blue arrows and dotted lines and solid lines, and how is the frontline trooper, the frontline employee, going to understand what the overall goal of this is, and how he or she plays in this goal. And so the litmus test for me is, anytime you're talking about a plan, can the frontline employee understand his or her role and understand why he or she is doing that role, so that when things inevitably, when the customer decides to go left instead of right, he or she is able to make decisions, make decisions on adjusting what they are actually doing. And so, communication, this again, and then the second piece on actual communication in the battlefield, you have multiple radio nets you're monitoring, internal net between the platoon. You have an external net that you're talking to other friendly forces. You have another net that, Dave is monitoring that is talking to above, right? And so the way you communicate, you have 4, 5, 6 seconds to communicate something. If you go into a long explanation like I am right now, all the net, you're going to clog up the net, and no one else can get any other important information out. So that applies directly to business in the sense that only one person can speak at a time. So use that time, be very clear in that time, clear and concise in the way you use that time, whether it's email, whether it's phone calls, whether it's meetings. You don't have time. The longer you speak, the more ineffective you become.
Yep, it's a bit like
I'll stop that comment.
Yes, in entrepreneurship, it's like pitching. The pitch presentation, and I also kind of see corporation benefiting from the pitch concept. Instead of having 50 slides or 100 slides, have 9 slides and pitch the whole plan in a very 15 minutes, 10 minutes, and so on. So now one question for you, which I'm really eager to know what you guys think. So in this world where collaboration becomes a big thing, right? I've worked with companies where there were really more command and control, and other companies where it was more everyone participates, it's a democratic process, and everyone has a say. So what's your views on this? Where do you see this going, and what's the importance of command and control versus collaboration and everyone having a say?
I think with everything, when we ask questions like that, I think that the appropriate answer is always you got to strike a right at the bat. There is no template that just works every time, that you just automatically do, one type of approach. I mean, as a leader, you got to understand the environment is going to be different. The needs of your people are going to be different. The capabilities of your people are going to be different. And the environment that dictates all that is going to require an evolution in your leadership change. And it may be that, a guy like Flynn, maybe Flynn works for me when he first gets hired and needs a lot of direct supervision, and I got to do a lot of direct interaction with him, and spend a lot of time all day together. And then 6 months from now, Flynn's virtually on autopilot, and I don't need to be, standing right behind him, walking him through everything he does. I want to bring in several people to do some strategic collaboration and bring in a whole bunch of different viewpoints, and spend a lot of time analyzing, the information and making decisions. And you want to get several viewpoints to do that. There are other times you'd like to be in a position as a leader that you've developed enough credibility to say, hey, Flynn, I need this to happen now. And Flynn's like, got it. And Flynn trusts me that it's in the best interest of the company, best interest of us doing it. And there's not a lot of time for collaboration. We saw that in the battlefield all the time. When we're planning strategic things, we want to solicit a lot of inputs, and we want to get people's inputs, and we want everybody at every level of the organization to feel like they're a participant, because the more involved they are, the more ownership they have, the more likely they're going to A, execute well, and B, really feel invested that they want a successful outcome. But there are times that we are certainly in a dynamic environment, whether it's combat or elsewhere, where the leader says, I need this to happen right now. Because that leader has perspective and a viewpoint that maybe not everybody else has. Realize that and go, hey, I trust Dave. We're going to make that happen. And you're not going to do a lot of collaboration and soliciting people's inputs and ideas because there's no time for that. And the answer is going to change constantly. Leader's job is to find the right balance, and it changes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And just the other piece on that, Dave, is we talk about being, the mindset of default aggressive. And that is, aggressive in your decision making, not aggressive towards your people, but in the way you just make decisions and move on the battlefield. That's obviously important. It shouldn't be default. I'm going to make the call right now if there's some time to actually collaborate, right? Yep. I think Dave disgracefully, there are times when you do it, there are times when you aren't. You should probably be spending more time talking to the experts in the team to come up with the best decision if you have the time to do so.
Yep.
You're going to come up with a better decision than what's in your mind. But sometimes they're not. Like it's something, there's a crisis situation with the customer or with the product, and you got to just make a call and do it. Not time to figure it out together as a team to come up with the 99% answer where you could come up with the 75% answer right now and get it done.
Exactly. And then it comes back to what you guys were saying before. Take a decision, take a risk also. If it fails, be a strong team to be okay to the fact that it failed, learn from it, the right spirit, and then, keep on going and moving around. That would be a healthy type, culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, let's move now. So now we talked really about, big corporation, big organization and so on. Let's take this down to entrepreneurship and selling. So I've heard through my missions, working with some sales team, and the sales team saying, oh, it's hard, the pricing is too high, the product is not innovative enough. And, what would you say to a sales team that has, high, financial targets that comes with, sort of excuses of why they're not meeting the numbers? The product is not innovative, the competition is too harsh, the customer doesn't understand, the value of the product, and so on and so on. So specifically for sales team, do you guys do workshops for sales teams? And what's the answer, to a sales team to motivate them? You guys do motivation too, right? So how do you motivate a sales guy to be a hunter, and really go get those dollars, So what's the mindset from a Navy SEAL or Marine Corps, there? I've seen a bit what you guys do, in the Mooster, the speeches and everything. And so can you give us a flavor of that?
Yeah, we'll probably tag team this one. So in no particular order, she asked a really valuable questions in there that are important, certainly as you're focusing on the sales team. So we don't do motivational speaking. There's a philosophy that we all understand because I think our experience has proven it to us time and time again. Motivation is not a very reliable tool. So they're not going to room and get them super excited and pumped up and, charge out the door and expect them to do well when things get demanding and difficult. And a lot of sales, as you know, and a part of any business, there's a lot of tedious, unenjoyable work that has to get done that's not fun, that's not exciting, that nobody really wants to do. And that boils down to the ability to do that stuff. But guess what? You have to do it. So you're going to hear Flynn and I talk a lot more about being disciplined about doing your job, not being motivated, because one will work and one will not. So no, we don't do motivational speaking, and you're not going to hear us talk about being motivated.
Okay.
We talk that all the time. But I think what you're getting at is the idea is how do you get your folks to be dedicated towards, and you kind of give that laundry list of the problem thing about being a salesman. If your product's not innovative enough, if the customer doesn't understand it, if your IT team isn't providing a solution fast enough, that's a problem because it's going to get in the way of you being successful. And nobody wants to be the best salesman on a company that goes bankrupt. Nobody wants to be the best salesman on a team that fails. And so I think you need to take a step back. And if I'm a leader in an organization that has a sales team as part of it, and you have an IT team and a management team and all those different elements, we refer to those as silos when they don't work together. And if sales is operating, if you're a salesman and a salesperson operating in your own silo and you're not paying attention to all the other contributors you being successful, you're going to fail.
Yep.
Because even if you can sell your product, if IT can't support it, the customer upset that you delivered a product that's not out of beta testing yet, and guess what? It's got a bunch of problems with it, and they're not happy with it. So the last thing you want to do is look at your world and you're the most important thing. And sometimes sales is the number one priority in a company, and sometimes it's not. And if you're a sales leader and you come in and you tell your people you're the most at this team all the time, you're going to find yourself, you're going to have a really hard time with the company being successful. So you need to collaborate with your peers, your counterparts, and you can identify problems you listed and you're a salesperson, find a way to solve those problems, even if it doesn't involve selling on that particular day. And that gets to something that Flynn said really well. It's about, there's ego in sales. We all know that, especially when you're top sales, when you hit your numbers, you're making big bonuses, and the company is surviving and thriving because of the efforts of what it be, the leader of that is, which is the sales team. But the reality is there's not a salesperson in the world that doesn't realize that they are heavily reliant on all the other supporting assets that go along and make. It's no different than being a pilot. I could talk about all day long what a great pilot I think I am, but there's a whole bunch of things that come into play for me to get that airplane airborne and do my job. And if I'm only focusing on that part of it, then eventually I'm going to fail. So salespeople need to understand really that all those problems that they list, those are your problems. You need to find a solution for it.
That's very interesting. It's the first time I hear, someone first say, we don't do motivation, which that was very interesting. Do you guys do workshops specifically for sales teams?
Yeah, I don't know if Flynn wants to take any specifics, but we take, you talk about our workshops towards who it is that we're working with.
Yeah, and typically with sales, we spend a lot of time on the cover and move aspect, and cover and move fundamentally is it's a gunfighting tactic that is all about teamwork. It's what Dave was talking about, breaking down silos, understanding roles and responsibilities, laying down cover fire so that the other group can maneuver and doing the same in kind, right? So it's all about teamwork. I think the other aspect to the sales, when we work with sales groups, specifically ones who say, hey, I got this terrible client, my main client or my main account is, I can't work with this person, or, it's super difficult. And, what we say, good, right? Like that's an opportunity for you to grow as a salesperson. That's an opportunity for you to get better at establishing relationships. If you can establish a solid relationship with a tough person, imagine how much better you'll be when you have a normal person you're working with. And then we hear the same kind of excuse, man, our products, this competitor has outmaneuvered us and outflanked us, and they came to market a year before us, and we're behind. Good, right? It's an opportunity for you as a salesperson to get better at your pitch, to get better at how you sell that product. And if you can sell a product that's inferior to another one, how much better are you going to be when you have a product that's on par, or you have a product that's slightly better than the competitor, right? It's just an opportunity for growth. Take a defeated mindset that, hey, all these things are against me, and I'm not going to meet my numbers, and excuse 1, 2, 3, to 20 doesn't matter. It's any problem, any situation that goes poorly, it's an opportunity for growth, and that's a mindset that we had to have in the SEAL team. That you had to have that mindset going through training, because you failed a lot. Yeah. And taking the mindset, hey, it's an opportunity for me to learn and get better. That's what it comes down to.
And that's what you're saying is about failure here is very interesting. I went to the Silicon Valley, and I come from France initially, and there's really a big gap between acceptance of failure in France and acceptance of failure in the Silicon Valley. When I talked to one entrepreneur over there, and I said, I started a startup and I failed. I didn't expect what he told me. He said, congratulations, welcome to the Silicon Valley. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. And over there, they really have developed that mindset, I think. And that's why they're super good at innovation, because they're okay with failure. They know it's a learning process. They know it's part of the deal. And that's when you fail, you learn something new, you pivot, continue moving forward, and you innovate. So it's interesting to see the connection there too.
Yeah.
And talking about innovation,
you actually have to fail to get in the game, right? It's kind of like an entry ticket. It's a bit of like, it's like the buds, quite frankly. It's a rite of passage.
yes,
Most entrepreneurs fail once or twice, 3 times before they actually hit something. So that's cool.
From my perspective, when I'm sitting with startups innovation, I really realize, I think, it's the war. The technological revolution is kind of a war. It's a competition that is global. It's a race against, accelerating innovation. There's going to be jobs, that's going to be automated. There's so much technology and so on going on out there. So how basically, do you resolve problem? How do you innovate from a Navy SEAL Marine Corps perspective? I'm going to give you an example. Let's take an example, real estate. You're a real estate agent, and you're doing business as usual, making your commission, you're selling your mortgages. And how do you make sure you don't get disrupted? There's this young kid in the UK. You probably heard about him. He's called Akshay. He's the first millionaire, 12 million pounds, I think his company's worth. And he's selling houses literally for $99 agent fee, so massive disruption for real estate, right? So, but this is happening. It happened in the music industry. It happens, in healthcare right now. There's a lot of disruption. So how do you manage, your company in this battlefield of innovation right now and technological revolution? Do companies need to change really the way they operate, as and not rest on existing assets? What's your thinking process there? Do you see the same thing? Maybe do you see the same thing that I'm?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think getting back to the battlefield. Number one, you have to respect your enemy, right? You have to. When Leif and Jocko went out to Iraq, a number of the guys they went with had combat experience, but they were going against an enemy that had been in sustained combat at this point for almost 4 years, every day almost. And they would fight at night, put their gun down, and walk around as a normal citizen during the day, right? So they had a very hardened enemy they were going against. Number one. Two, in order to combat that, you had to innovate and adapt. You had to, after every operation, you'd come back, you put your gear down, and you go right to the debrief room, and you talk about what went right % of the time, and then 90% of the time you talk about what went wrong and what we're going to do differently next time. What are we going to do to adapt? Because the enemy was doing the same things. They must take a sniper position in a certain way, and then maneuver down, covering for a group that's maneuvering, set up IEDs. The next night there'd be IEDs in place, and if we followed that same tactic, our guys would hit IEDs. So it's a constant need for innovation to stay alive in combat, and the same thing in business, right? I mean, in part, the first comes back to a bit of self-assessing. What your proposition? Can you be charging as much as you are? For the real estate example is a great example of that, right? Should they 3% commission to, and ultimately buyers are empowered now to go and find the houses themselves, right? So you have to constantly ask the tough questions. If the answers you come up with aren't satisfactory or aligned with what you're doing now, you need to adapt.
Yep.
Whether it's changing the price point, whether it's changing the delivery mechanism, whether it's cutting costs, or moving up a higher price, to a different part of the market. But you need to be constantly maneuvering, or else you're the upstart scrappy enemy that you're going to deal with is going to outflank you.
And then you guys help with this with your workshop, help company change constantly, and adapt that and get that mindset, right? And it's all in the book also. I'm going to plug the book one more time, Extreme Ownership, right? That's a lot of what we've covered and much more is in this book. And I've also added it to the Facebook page. So if anyone wants to, read a really cool book, it's on the Facebook page. So now let's close the interview with a few more casual questions. So what's the health routine? And I'm going to be honest, every day I'm going to take my example, or every night I'm like, tomorrow morning I'm getting up, I'm going to do some push-ups, I'm going to go to the gym, and often I slack and I don't go. What's your advice there to have that discipline, and give me an advice so I can get up and do my push-ups and my workouts, every single morning where I'm saying I'm going to do it? What's the magic?
I'm going to let
trick?
the ceiling for this question.
Listen, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to self-discipline, right? But one of the ways, holding yourself accountable, but one of the ways to kind of shortcut that, and it really isn't a shortcut, you got to just start doing it. One of the ways I found successful is find someone else who does the same thing. So whether it's your wife, whether it's a buddy, and you guys hold each other accountable. Whether it's working out together, you guys meet and do it together is obviously best, or there is just an accountability of later in the day or that morning you text each other. I mean, part of what Jocko does, right, is to hold people accountable, saying, hey, listen, I'm up, you guys up, right? So find someone who's like-minded and wants to get after it like you do, and either work out with them or hold each other accountable to start. And then once you build that once you have that discipline, which is a bit of an accountability play, you'll start to build your own self, right? To where, if your buddy decides to stop waking up, you'll have seen the benefit and have trained your body and your mind to get up and get after it.
Okay, so I'm going to try to follow that advice, and I'll send you an email in a month, and hopefully I will go back to working out every, 2 or 3 times a week. 2 or 3 times is a good. 2 or 3 times is a good thing every day. What do you guys recommend?
It depends on your goals, right? I work out 5 or 6 times a week.
Okay.
Jocko doesn't miss a day. Dave is probably 8 times a week. Is that you, Dave?
Negative.
No. It all depends on your goals. Depends on what you're doing. I think if you did 3 2-hour workouts, I don't think they're as beneficial as doing 5 45-minute workouts, or just to get your body moving every day, just to get it used to it. You can work out and that's not, you just warm up a little bit better. It actually helps. So don't think because you're sore you need to take 2 days off. That's not the case. I mean, it's up to you. It's up to your goals, up to what you're doing. There are a million workouts out there that make sense. Find one that works for you. Find one that pushes you, that you don't just get comfortable, because your body will adapt very quickly. Again, similar to what we talked about earlier in combat. Your body is somewhat the enemy, right? Your body says, I'm tired. Body says, give me that, donut, or that, I could say French fries, right? What do you get? Yeah. Anyway, that's what your body, they're the enemy. And you have to constantly innovate and adapt what you're doing to your body. And it's actually more fun. So.
And in Boston, the good excuse is, I'm not going to run because it's snowing, it's cold, it's freezing. And it's okay to run in the cold, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. And it's even better, right?
Don't try, you got. Yeah. I lived in Boston for a couple of years, and I did the Charles River in January when there's snow on the ground. It's just, it's a different challenge.
I'm going to try to take this as my next goal, there, to work out a bit more. And then final question. So this came from, women in the Startups Innovation audience. You guys are tough guys, military, discipline and everything. But, you guys also need love, and, are you like the romantic types? Are you, and how do you apply also maybe, the Navy SEAL mentality to, relationships? Because it's not easy, right, to be married, and if we look at the data, I think 2 out of 3, marriages end up in divorce. So how can people apply this mentality to basically relationship, couples, love in general, if it's possible? I don't know. And then we'll close with this, and maybe a last comment from you guys on what you want to say else.
This is kind of right up Dave's alley, I think. So
well, I'm gonna have to defer the question on how you apply the Navy SEAL mentality to marriage. I can't answer that one.
Well, actually, don't apply the Navy SEAL.
Military discipline, yes. Military.
So, maybe a better way to look at that question, if want to, in all seriousness, is the extreme ownership approach to relationships. Look, I have treated my wife on more than one occasion and been reminded, hey, I'm not in the Marine Corps. And that's me being lazy and being complacent and getting comfortable with, talking to everybody, not realizing everybody's different. So I'm around big, tough guys all the time. I can tell you, I love my wife. I like spending time with anybody else in the world. Flynn, Jocko, Leif, JP will tell you the exact same thing. Their families are the most important thing. It's the things we care about the most. It's the reason why we work hard and to be able to be a good husband and be a good dad. I care nothing more than to go down and spend time with my kids in the basement and play. And that's what I want to do. So this whole facade, this tough guy thing, not that anybody's ever accused me of that, but it's just not part of it. But the idea of ownership, when we talk about those principles, they apply everywhere, man. I mean, every argument I've ever been in my wife, I go one of two directions. I either blame her and tell her she's wrong and tell her it's her fault. And guess what? That isn't received very well. And every time I say, you know what, I'm sorry, I did this thing wrong and I apologize and I'm not going to do that next time different. Every time I say that, she says, it's okay. I love you. The ideas of extreme ownership, the philosophies about being successful in combat, being successful, it's just about being a good human being, being successful in everything you do in life. And every single thing we do, it translates perfectly. To include raising your kids, to include all those things. Don't be a tough guy. Don't act like a Marine. Don't act like a Navy SEAL. Take responsibility for your life, and that will make you, by definition, as good a husband, as good as father as you can be. And if we took a little bit more ownership of the things going on around us, instead of just finding excuses things aren't going great in your marriage and finding excuses why things aren't going great raising your kids, you're going to be a lot better at it. And that natural inclination is to other people and not in ourselves. And if you can just do a 180 and do the exact opposite, you're more than likely going to have a much better success rate in the 2 out of 3 failed marriages, which is heartbreaking because those things are fixable and recoverable. And what it takes is setting your ego aside, saying sorry when you make mistakes, responsibility of everything goes on in your world around you. And that's a recipe to be successful anywhere. And my wife reminds me on a regular basis now when I don't do that.
Excellent.
And
Excellent.
I'm company with 2 guys who wrote a book called Extreme Ownership. And you got to practice what you preach, and when you do, things work out, and when you don't, they don't.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Flynn. So maybe to close the interview, anything, the next muster, the next workshop, how can people book you guys for workshops in their companies and so on? And, any things you want to communicate to the podcast audience there?
Yeah. If anybody wants to reach out to any of us, echelonfront.com, or just go to our website, echelonfront.com, and you'll see links to Flynn and myself and everybody on the team. You can email directly to the contact info@echelonfront.com and ask any questions. The muster information is on there. We have a muster coming up May 17th and 18th in DC. And we're getting close to San Francisco in September, nailing down some dates. So we're finalizing that right now, but you'll see us in the Bay Area in September. We're going to start a new program. Tell me, Flynn, what we're doing for the roll call. We're going to do something called a roll call. Law enforcement, first responders, and a shorter program, about a day and a half, and sort of broaden our opportunity to engage with people that we are really respecting and grateful for, that are, now that we're left the military and into the private sector, there's still plenty of people out there holding the line for us, because we're not doing that anymore. And so we're going to expand the muster to something called a roll call, where it's for that, just those clientele, active duty military, first responders, law enforcement, and the like. All sorts of good information out there on when we're going to do that on our website. We're all over Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find us all. And then obviously Jocko's podcast, place to hear about us and hear about our philosophy. It really comes from Jocko and Leif writing that book, and they talk about that. He talks about that on his podcast, all the information there.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. It was a great honor to have you both. You have an incredible curriculum. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience also will learn a lot. So thank you so much, and we'll talk next time.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man. It's good being here.
Really
Cheers.
appreciate it.
Yep.